Hello, and welcome to another episode of JRPG. This video is a continuation in my game collecting series. This video will show you how to get games cheap, and while some cheap games can be good if you know where to look, the majority of these games found using these tips won't be really that expensive, but may not also be the best. These games can add volume to your collection, or just be decent, okay games that you got for cheap. Either way, some of these games that you may get using these methods will give you a myriad of benefits. More to play, they will complement the other games in your collection, add volume, and not hurt your wallet. With an idea of these concepts in mind, let's get started! So why would you want to buy games that just take up space? Wouldn't it be better to just buy games that are good, or ones that you care about? Not all cheap games are bad necessarily. Some might have sold well, and are extremely common, hence why they are cheap. Games like Xevious, Pitfall, and Crazy Taxi. Titanfall for Xbox One is a recent addition to this category, and this game can be obtained for fairly cheap on Amazon. You can also find games that are good buys as well as in the same manner. I got my copy of Solaris for the Atari 2600 for $2 at Trader's Village, a local flea market here in Houston. Even though it's not an expensive game, it's probably one of the most technologically advanced games on the system. I've seen it on a list of games that push the Atari's hardware to the limit, and it's these games that I talk about when I talk about finding cheap games. Cheap games are not necessarily bad, but you can buy bad games cheap really easily, so research is a must if you want to get good games cheap. First of all, find out what you're comfortable with spending. That way it won't be such a blow in case you take a loss on a game that may not be worth much or isn't a good game. Cheap games can also be used to finish a collection. Say for instance, you wanted to collect the entire library of Nintendo 64 games. You'd have to buy some of the cheaper games as well to finish the set. Just another instance of why buying games cheap can be beneficial. Before we continue any further, I just wanted to address that if you buy games cheap solely for quantity, your collection may not be taken as seriously. So yes, if it works for you now, then great. But be sure to buy some more expensive titles if you actually want a collection worth bragging about. Sometimes you can happen on games cheap as well, so be ready for those gems, and if they're meant to be, they'll be there for you. Just be open to bolstering your collection and letting it grow. Games in mass quantities can be obtained in the usual ways that you'd probably think of on standard websites like Amazon, eBay, Craigslist. You can also check out local game stores like GameStop, Game, Games Plus, Game Exchange, Game Over Games, and more. Collecting quantity games in these stores is easy. Just know where the cheap games are located, and hopefully you'll happen on a sale. I love it when games are on sale. Sometimes I like to buy quantity games that are under $5. If I'm going to buy games to add to my collection, I keep this number in mind because on Amazon, shipping alone can cost anywhere from $4 to $5. Some of these games can be worth paying $5 now instead of paying the same price and having to wait a few days to actually get it. That is unless you're looking for a specific game. Just further reiterating what I mentioned about Solaris, I would have paid $4 to $5 for a game that I got for $2. You're not going to find a deal like that online. If you can find games in local areas and you don't care what you're collecting but want to start cheap, this is a good tip to know. Even if you want to add a bit to your collection, that's a good place to start. Atari games are a great place to start collecting in this manner because a lot of the games can be good and cheap since there were so many of them in production when the console was popular. Like Pac-Man. Some good stores to check are Goodwill. You'll tend to find more recent-ish games around the PS2, GameCube, Xbox era. Some PC games you'll find too. Most likely these games will be sports games, but you can find some gems, like I got this copy of God of War complete in box for $4 at Goodwill. I scored big when I got my copy of Mario Kart Wii for just $10. It's worth about $50. Five Below is another store to check out. It is a store like a dollar store, but everything there is $5 and under. They sometimes sell games there for $5, like Starhawk and Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. Flea markets, like Trader's Village mentioned previously, and garage sales are good places to pick up some cheap games. A lot of people have said that the garage sale scene is dead, but I think this is more of an isolated statement versus a global statement. I've gotten good things at garage sales before. Frogger for PS1 and Dishonored for PS3 for just $1 each. I also got this demo disc for Hot Shots Golf 2. Thrift stores and resale shops are good places to check out too. Typically, I find a lot of Guitar Hero and Rock Band and sports games in these stores, but other people like Dave and Joe from GameSack swear by them. Really, what's best is to check out your local area. These games that I find here are usually under $5, and so if there's a Rock Band or sports game that you may not have and want, it may be safe to check out thrift stores and resale shops for them. Best Buy, surprisingly, is a good place to find some cheap games. While Best Buy usually tends to have games more on the pricey side, you can find some games cheap when they try to free up some shelf space. I found brand new copies of Steel Diver and Def Jam Rapstar for $2 each. Walmart tends to do this too. I was able to pick up AC/DC Live Rock Band Track Pack for both PS3 and 360 for $1 each. Always check clearance sections! As I mentioned before, a great place to start collecting games would be the Atari games. Atari games are cheap and good for what they are, and you can get some good, solid titles for not a whole lot of money. There were a lot of games in circulation in the 1980s before the crash of the gaming industry, and so it makes games like these cheaper than they probably would have ever been today. For these, you'll have to find an avenue in which to buy them that works best for you. But if you can get them cheap, it's worth it. There are some games that do work their way up in price and get rarer, but I would say that the Atari is a great place to start collecting and a great system to come back to when you're ready to add those more expensive titles to your library. I have both an Atari 2600 and a 400, and I'm always looking to get a 5200 and more. It's a great retro system and a great place to start collecting if you haven't started already, or if you have an interest in starting. As previously mentioned, if you wanted to buy a complete set of Nintendo 64 games, you'd have to buy some cheap games eventually to complete that collection. Some of the games that you may remember from the N64 days may be cheap, and you can build your collection while obtaining that childhood nostalgia feeling. I previously did a video over the Nintendo 64 spine labels, a great way to organize your Nintendo 64 library. If this is your case and you want to see more about it and how it can help organize your Nintendo 64 library, click this Nintendo 64 cartridge to go there now. Some other avenues that may not be as well known are websites like Swagbucks and Listia. I get free games from these websites all the time by buying gift cards with earned credits or just buying the games flat out. Sometimes Swagbucks will do raffles for consoles too, so you can win them that way too. But these two websites are great places to try to earn credits to get free games. I do that. I've gotten games like Grand Theft Auto 4 for absolutely free. If you work at it, it'll work for you. I'm also an avid user of them, and I will include reference links in the description if you would like to sign up. But if you don't feel like joining under me, then you can join by yourself too. It's totally fine either way with me, just as long as these tips help you guys out. If you may have any questions or need advice, feel free to message me and I'll help you out however I can. Shop Goodwill is another site that I mentioned in my Quality Games episode. You can buy game lots on this website cheap, and also find a few games relatively cheap as well. Shop Goodwill also has a Shop Goodwill Books website that sells some games complete in box for various alright, decent prices. So that's another website to check out as well. Even if you're looking for consoles, Shop Goodwill is a great place to get cheap games and accessories. The only problem with this website is that there are no refunds. So buyers beware on this one, because everything is sold as is. But you could get lucky like I have in the past. So good luck to you if you try this route. Well, that about does it for this episode. We covered a lot, and I hope it gave you some enlightenment on different ways to add games to your collection without breaking your bank. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and if you have any questions or comments, any suggestions on episode topics, let me know, and I'll see what I can make work. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.